This is Keith Howard from Cops Corrections Videos. If you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button. I'd like to talk today about disciplinary write-ups. In police work, it's citations. In corrections, you can call it a disciplinary write-up. In Wisconsin, they're called conduct reports. There's been some controversy lately on some of the corrections sites that I monitor about whether an officer should write inmates up for every infraction. And one school of thought presented was that when you're a new officer, you should write every infraction up every time you see it, no matter how big, no matter how small. You know, I don't agree with that. I think by doing that, you may show the people who's in charge, but I think you're going to be bringing more headaches upon yourself than you ever wanted. You know, working as a police officer in Wisconsin, we have a definitive speed limit. That means if you're going 26 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, I can pull you over and I can give you a speeding ticket for violating the law, for speeding. Do I do that? No. Do I know any cops that do that? No. Even in Rosendale, which is considered the speeding capital of Wisconsin, you're not going to get written up for going 26 in a 25 mile an hour zone. To do so would be absolutely asinine, just as I feel it's asinine to write up every single infraction that you encounter as a correctional officer. Now, there are things you can't ignore. You can't ignore drug use. You can't ignore sexual activity. You can't ignore assaults on officers. You can't ignore disrespect. But if you go into a room and somebody has their radio a little bit too loud, and you give them a ticket the first time, a conduct report, also called ticket, if you give them a ticket the first time you go into that room, well, okay, you got your point across. You're the boss, you're the hard ass, you're the guy that they're going to have to deal with. But I'll tell you what, you're going to have a miserable shift, because you can better believe as soon as you get down to the end of that cell block and get back to your station, you're going to have 3 or 4 more radios blaring just to watch you run, just to see if you're going to get up and see what you're going to do. If you don't think I'm right on that, give it a try. Give it a try. One of the great things about being a police officer or a correctional officer is being able to use your discretion. Discretion comes with the job. Now, I've heard some people use the ideology that new officers don't know discretion. That's something that you need to be taught in the academy. You need to be taught what's important, what's not important. Are all the rules important? Yes, they are. What's one of the most important keys that we have as correctional officers and as police officers? Communications. Let people know your expectations. You know, if you went down to that room and you told that guy, hey dude, you want to turn your radio down, it's a little bit too loud, or you need to put your headphones on, whatever the case may be for the rules of your facility, chances are they're going to do it. Now, if you want to be a hard ass and you go down there and you say, you know, that radio is too loud, I'm writing you up, I'm confiscating your radio for a week. You can do that too, but is that really going to solve a problem? Is that creating a monster? You know, one of the things when I promoted to lieutenant in corrections, I'd been a pretty strong union member. I'd been a chief steward at one institution. I was a steward at another institution. And I decided when I promoted that one of the most important things I needed to do was back my officers. And one of the reasons I decided to do that is because I had a supervisor that every time I would call him down to have somebody locked up, the first thing he would say is, well, what did that sergeant do to make you go off? Well, anybody who's been in corrections knows if you have a supervisor that approaches you like that, it's pretty disheartening. So I decided that I was going to support my staff. And I did. I supported my staff. If they wrote a ticket, whether it was for something minor or something major, I took action and I came down on that inmate. Well, there was one particular officer who had to dictate, I will write them up for every single thing. So, being a new lieutenant, I supported that. Boy, did I create a monster with that. This individual is writing people up for absolutely everything. I would get, on an average day, probably 6 to 10 conduct reports from that one officer alone. Now, the other officers in his unit that work second shift or work third shift, you know, second shift is the activity shift, that's when you have all the inmates in the unit, would probably average maybe 1 or 2 conduct reports a shift. This person, it was 6 to 10. Well, finally I decided enough is enough, and I went down and I talked to the officer, and I pretty much told him, you know, you can either run it or you can write it. If you're going to write it, you're not going to have the respect of anybody here. You're just going to, the inmates know that no matter what they do, you're going to give them the maximum on what happens. You know, it's like having your kid. You know, your kid does something wrong and you smack him every time he does something wrong. Pretty soon, he's not going to care what he does wrong because he knows he's going to get smacked. You've got to use discretion. You know, this officer, there were times where he would write people up for such silly things that the inmate would just go off. Okay? So now there's a reason that you need to take the inmate out of the unit. He's either threatening the sergeant, he's, you know, creating a disruption. But the fact of the matter who's in danger when that happens? It's the people responding to the scene. It's your fellow officers that you're putting in danger because you choose to be a hard ass. You know, I'm not saying don't enforce the rules. The rules are there to be enforced. Policies and procedures are there to be enforced. I'm saying use your discretion. Use your discretion and do what you know is right and do what you know what your job is. Your job isn't to be a hard ass. Your job isn't to punish inmates. Inmates are in prison for punishment. They're not in prison as punishment. That's something that each staff member needs to realize. Until next time, this is Keith Helwig from Cops Corrections Videos. Stay safe and watch your back.